Hey folks, so today we want to talk about the power of story, the impact that it has on the brain, show some different examples and show what those things do when you're watching them. And we're also going to share 3 things that you could be doing at your organization to improve the quality of storytelling. So first off, power of story. If there's one thing that we can leave with today, that I want to leave you with today, is to please tell your customers stories. There's nothing better you can be doing as a marketer, as a communicator, than sharing the stories of your customers. Let's talk about how to do that. I'm going to talk about 4 different things. 1, just talking about Donald Miller and the story brand trend. I'm going to be talking about the psychology of narrative a bit, hijacking emotions for marketing, ethically, of course, and last, tools. So first, we're going to talk about the frustrating genius of Donald Miller. So if you haven't heard yet, Donald Miller is an expert storyteller. He's an author. He wrote a bunch of books in the early 2000s, late 2000s, mostly kind of self-help, self-exploration books. And a lot of it was on the kind of the Christian media scene. Pretty good author, and through that experience, he learned some things that you could be doing during storytelling that are kind of universal truths. The hero's journey, except for expanded. And he also learned that some of these things can be employed in the way that we do business to improve the way that we're talking about our companies, our organizations, our nonprofits. And so he put that to work in a book called Building a Story Brand. And he's got a brand called Story Brand, where he brings in people and trains them on how to do this for their organizations. And so really cool stuff, this narrative-based approach to sales and marketing. The biggest takeaways, though, that I just want to hit on, because we're gonna talk about those a little bit during our presentation today, is that your customers are always the hero. Your customers drive your business, not your product. Your customers drive your business, right? And then from a messaging standpoint, if you confuse, you lose. Simple is a constant mantra for Donald Miller. And as much as I love Donald Miller and I listen to his podcast, I just want to put a disclaimer out there that I'm not an official story brand guide. I just really like what he's got going on. Section 2, the psychology of story. And here we're going to talk about what I like to call the tale of 2 marketers. All right, marketer number 1. If you recognize this, it's a Fender Stratocaster electric guitar. Here's how marketer number 1 might, or marketer A, might approach the sale of that. When we released the Stratocaster in 1954, we didn't set out to create a classic, but we did. The Stratocaster's sleek style, articulate sound, and plethora of innovations redefined electric guitar and opened up a brave new world of possibilities. Fender, synonymous with all things rock and roll. All right, here's marketing professional B. The stage goes dark. The crowd hushes with anticipation. A single beam of light falls on you, and the drummer clicks you in. 1, 2, 3, 4. This is your moment. What will be your sound? The Fender Stratocaster. Start your legend today. So what's the difference between these, right? Which one do you prefer, A or B? Personally, I know I love B, right? And that's because they're telling a story. So marketer A gives us black text on a white background. They tell us facts. They use $10 words like plethora and synonymous, right? They've got this little humble brag in there where they talk about, well, we didn't set out to create a classic, but we did, right? But they never invite the user into the story. Marketer B, on the other hand, they set the stage. They build anticipation with emotion, simple words, right? They communicate the why as a feeling. And then they invite you to be the center of the story. You're the hero. So stories have an interesting effect on the brain. When we create tension or distress in a story, it's proven to increase a neurochemical called cortisol, which is a chemical that focuses our attention. Now, I just want to say, I'm not a brain scientist. There's a lot of different neurochemicals that are going on at any given time. But this comes from a particular study at Berkeley, where they looked at this and they took measurements in the blood of various neurotransmitters. And cortisol increases when we view or hear stories of distress and tension. And then when those stories are relieved, when we see the resolve for connection is completed, we get a release of what's called oxytocin, right? And we're familiar with this neurotransmitter, right? This is the warm, fuzzy feeling, right? This is the thing that makes us feel comfortable and at home. It's it's the happy drug, as they like to call it, right? And what we know is that when you have a cycle of increasing cortisol and then resolving it with oxytocin, this opens up human behavior into a willingness to help, a willingness to listen. And we can actually even see in studies that it shows that there's an increase in our ability to, or our desire to donate to a charity or brand, even complete strangers. So we're gonna do a little bit of experiment here, and I want you to watch this video. This is from Embrace Life. It's from Sussex County. It's a seatbelt PSA. And I love it because it always works, and it does a great job of building cortisol and then resolving with oxytocin. So we're gonna watch that real quick. Take a look. So I love this PSA. It's just this micro story, and it creates this absolute case study for what happens in our brains when we increase tension and then resolve it. If you notice while you're watching the video, and I encourage you to go back and watch it again on your own time, it's about the moment where the hands come together across the dad's chest that you realize that your heart is beating like crazy, right? That's that cortisol, it's pumping, it's focusing attention, right? And then when he's safe and you see all the sparkles essentially kind of going through the air, right? You start to feel the warm fuzzies to realize that his family was there for him. And for a lot of viewers who see this the first time, they immediately start crying, and either they have no idea why, right? Or they completely know why, right? And that they're empathizing with the story. But that's that rush of oxytocin. In fact, there's so much of it that it moves you even to tears. And so this is a great example of how these chemicals work. Now, what's interesting here is that it doesn't have to be, this story of life or death situation to create a reaction or a connection to a brand. This is just something that I like to use to show what that looks like, but this can happen at a much smaller level within any brand. And this happens in longer stories, right, where we need this tension relief cycle. And that tension relief cycle is what builds what we call transportation, where you actually begin to emotionally and physically resonate with the characters that you're following, right? We see this in most movies, right, or most long-form stories, this wave of increasing tension, right? So we meet a character who has a problem, who meets a guide, but he refuses the call. But then he takes up the call, and there's a massive training montage. And then he tries to solve the problem, and there's a massive failure. But then he learns from that failure, and there's rising action, rising action, rising action, until we get to the climax. He achieves success, right? Rush of oxytocin off that cortisol, right? And then we resolve, and that's the end of the story. And by the time it's done, we are completely in connection with these characters. And we can achieve the same thing in the way that we tell the stories about our business. I've got another example here of kind of hijacking emotions for marketing ethically, right? And this one deals with empathy specifically. So we took the one before where it was a seatbelt ad. Naturally, we want everyone to wear seatbelts. That's the safe way to go. But this one actually has a commercial purpose to it, and it's still riding on those same neurotransmitters. So let's take a look at this one. This one is called Birds. It's from Extra.
Sometimes the little things last the longest. Give extra, get extra.
And so I love that one. It's a beautiful example of telling a story as a commercial, and then it's also directly tied in with the brand, right? I mean, because you want gum, which is a small thing to last a long time, and they come up with this amazing metaphor of a story, this connection between a father and his daughter, this universal idea of relationship that they bring in to sell more gum, frankly, right? And so when we're done watching this, not only do we feel good, do we feel a connection and a stronger sense of humanity, right? But we're also more inclined to buy extra gum the next time because, man, extra relates to me. They understand me, right? So it's a great idea for story. So our last section here, 4, tools. Here's a few things you can be doing in your organization to tell better stories. 1, website story audit. 2, telling more case studies, customer testimonials. And 3, equipping and training storytellers. Let's dive into these a little more. So a web story audit is simpler than it sounds. Really, we want to look at our website and look at 3 specific things, right? Because the website is a top source for prospective buyers or stakeholders in our organization for information, at least for most organizations it is, we want to make sure that, that people find the story that they're looking for on your site, right? So question 1 is, will they find their genre, right? Are you even speaking their language? Do you use the words that they want to see in their industry? Does it sound like there's a relationship, right? When I used to go to Blockbuster, right, back when there was a Blockbuster, if I want to go to the action section, right, or the sci-fi section, we need to make sure that we have the genre in the store to deliver the thing that it is that I want, right? And so if a user comes to your website and doesn't really feel like there's genre, maybe they're not quite speaking their language, they're going to split, right? So that's really important, making sure that the genre's there. Number 2, will they find a story of someone like them finding their happily ever after, right? And that's where those case studies come in, and we're going to talk about that a little bit in a second. But does your website serve it, right? Does your website have customer testimonials? Does it have case studies? Does it use video storytelling as a way of sharing and championing your customer stories? If they can't find somebody who looks or sounds or an example of a business, right, that's like theirs on your website, you can't guarantee that they're gonna feel a trust for your brand. You have to demonstrate that. You have to earn it, and the way you earn it is through story. And the last thing we like to ask is, does your site say you more than it says we? Is your site written in the second person? Are you talking to another person? Is there an invitation for you? Is there an invitation for the second person to enter into the story? That's really important. And so we want to make sure that we say you more than we say we. If we start with you before we say we, whenever we say we, we're referring to both us at the company, right, and you, the user. So the next section we want to look at is case studies and testimonials. Our customers are better salespeople than we are, right? And so this is your chance to create emotional impact by championing your customer stories. Case studies are the best example of this, and they all kind of look the same, right? We've seen this on websites before. Problem, solution, results. The reason we see problem, solution, results over and over and over again as the common format for these is because it's rooted in narrative arc, right? The problem releases cortisol, right? It creates tension. The solution is what creates that connection that solves the problem, releases oxytocin, and then results are they have happily ever after. So that's why we tell case stories in this way. You don't have to call it problem, solutions, results. You can call it whatever you want. But if you format your stories in that way, that's the fastest way to connect with a narrative arc, and that's going to connect with your audience. The last thing I want to point out is that video stories are the best way to do this, right? So there's a lot of different ways we can tell a story, a lot of different ways we can engage, but video is the best. And this leads us to our last tool, number 3, training and equipping storytellers. And this could be one of the more difficult things you have to do in your organization because it involves engaging other groups, right? So the first thing we want to look at is equipping your sales team, right? So in some companies, marketing and sales are one and the same. Sometimes they're a little bit different. We want to make sure that we break down those barriers and that we give your sales team what they need to be successful, right? Your sales team, they already tell stories already. Like that's what makes them good salespeople. We just want to give them better ones and give them the most recent ones. So whatever it takes to create that, if we're going to make it in a video format or if we're going to tell it in a case study format, create those tools and create a relationship with your sales team to understand what tools they want, what stories they want to tell, and then put them in their hands and let them go forth and engage the customers. The second thing we want to look at is, hey, how do we equip the whole company, right? So does your company have a rhythm or a place of telling those stories and sharing them within the company? Do you have a way of motivating employees with with the stories of the impact that they get to make. So we've got all these stories of customers, right? And oftentimes they're only told externally, but why not share them internally as well? How do we create even more connections for our employees so that they can go forth into their families and their friends and their communities, sharing not only what they get to do at work every day, but the impact that it has beyond? And then the last thing we want to talk about is equipping your customers themselves. So your customers, if you've done a great job, you've given them that story-worthy experience, they're already going to want to share these stories. But one of the things that we can do to help out is simply to ask them to share. A lot of times our customers will share their stories whenever asked, or if they're asked for a referral on the outside. Most business comes from word of mouth. It comes from customers talking about their stories. But sometimes if they're just not talking about it, if you simply ask them to share their story and say, hey, can you give me a Google review? Can you recommend me on LinkedIn? Would you mind sharing the story with a couple of your other relationships, your friendships, or your peers and your coworkers? That can take the experience that has been unique between you and that particular customer and expand it way beyond so that you're having a better chance of bringing in even more prospective buyers. That's 3. Once again, one of the more difficult ones to do because it involves engaging people, right, and to go out and share these stories for you. But as much as we can train and equip storytellers, the better off we're going to be. I want to end this by returning to what I said in the beginning. If there's really one thing that we can take away from this webinar, it's just that we want you to tell your customers' stories. And that's all I have for today. If you want to follow us on our YouTube, or if you want to follow us on our blog, subscribe to our newsletter on our website. That's awesome. You get access to even more of this. Otherwise, have a great day. Thanks.